When millions rise in unison, can they truly alter the course of a nation? Or will old patterns simply reassert themselves, as they so often have throughout history? This is no ordinary demonstration. It is a groundswell, a true movement, threatening to upend the entrenched powers that have ruled for decades. What began as resistance to a single leader's ambitions has become a crucible for the nation's future, a trial of whether justice and democracy can endure against elite interests and a history of inequality. But this time, something fundamental has shifted. This is not a fleeting urban protest, nor is it merely the discontent of a single social stratum. Across every region and background, teachers who had watched students lose hope, truck drivers who ferried goods on battered roads, market women who supported entire families, students hungry for a future, religious leaders seeking peace, and civil servants who had seen too much, Ivorians have come together. The city's boulevards and village roads alike reverberate with a single demand: democracy or nothing. And the world is watching, tense. To ignore this moment is to risk catastrophe. Should the movement be crushed or fade, Ivory Coast could plunge into civil war once more. Social wounds would deepen, and the fragile hope for democracy across the region, not just within national borders, could collapse. The stakes have never been higher. The fate of millions and the trajectory of democratic progress across West Africa now hangs in the balance. The next hours and days will test not only the resolve of the Ivorian people, but the very possibility of fair power and prosperity on the continent. Yet, beneath the chants and banners, tensions simmer. How did Ivory Coast reach such a tipping point? And can unity withstand the gathering storm? Let us begin by imagining the scene. On the morning of August 9th, 2025, the heart of Ivory Coast pulsed with unrest. Not only in Abidjan, the commercial capital, renowned for its bustling markets and ever-expanding skyline, but from remote hamlets nestled amid rolling cocoa fields to the sprawling cities that anchor the nation, people surged into the streets in numbers that defied belief. Seasoned reporters, many of whom had covered uprisings from Cairo to Caracas, called it unprecedented. Their reason was clear. President Alassane Ouattara's declaration that he would seek a fourth term, a move widely seen as defying the constitution and challenging the very essence of Ivorian democracy, had struck a nerve deeper than any before it. Students abandoned lessons, office workers walked out, and farmers left fields untended. Even sworn political enemies and rival civil society groups stood side by side. For the first time in living memory, all these fractured voices merged around one demand: President Ouattara must not claim a fourth term. How did a whisper become a roar that shook an entire nation in a single day? On the morning of August 9th, 2025, Abidjan woke quietly. Only hints of protest drifted through coffee stalls, classrooms, and minibus rides. By midday, those murmurs had erupted. Hundreds of thousands surged through city boulevards, and by dusk, the movement had swept across every region of Ivory Coast. For a sense of scale, imagine the entire population of a major European city, say Barcelona or Munich, pouring into the streets at once. That was the magnitude of the Ivorian mobilization. The uprising's speed and breadth stunned even seasoned observers. Social media pulsed with viral footage, women drumming outside police stations, students scaling government gates, and veteran politicians locking arms with activists. Each video, each image transformed isolated rallies into an electrifying movement. Old divisions fell away, replaced by a wave of hope and fury that ricocheted from Abidjan to distant towns and across West Africa. Protesters brandished banners denouncing dictatorship and chanting "No to a fourth term." Their voices thundered from city squares to the farthest villages. Urban and rural, young and old, wealthy and struggling, Ivorians who rarely saw eye to eye were suddenly united, forging a solidarity unseen in decades. This unity echoed moments in other countries' histories, such as the Philippine People Power Revolution in 1986 or the anti-apartheid rallies in South Africa during the late 1980s, where disparate groups found common cause against a seemingly immovable regime. But unity this fierce carries peril. Every side, protesters, police, and politicians knew that one spark could tip the country from peaceful demonstration into chaos or ignite an irreversible transformation. The nation teetered between the promise of democracy and the threat of collapse. Why did this extraordinary unity ignite now? And what buried wounds have driven so many into the streets, risking everything? To grasp the stakes, we must dig below the headlines and trace the roots of a crisis that has been festering for years. What happens when power rewrites the rules in broad daylight? In Ivory Coast, the very definition of democracy hangs in the balance. To understand the fire beneath this sudden uprising, we must journey back through broken promises, mounting inequality, and bitter disputes over power. Only then can we see how today's protests became inevitable. Opposition figures, the pillars of any real contest, have been swept aside. The most formidable challengers were barred from running, leaving ballots stripped of genuine alternatives. To many, the coming election is a foregone conclusion, more coronation than competition. The country's crisis centers on a constitution rewritten in 2016. Its promise was simple. No president could hold office for more than 2 terms. Yet President Alassane Ouattara insists that this reset the clock, erasing his previous terms and granting him a fresh start. For millions, this move is not just a technicality. It is a rupture of trust, a betrayal etched into the nation's soul. The memories of 2010 cast a long shadow. That disputed election unleashed a civil war that claimed thousands of lives. The trauma lingers in every protest, every defiant chant echoing through the streets. Ivorian families who lost loved ones in the violence are reminded daily of what is at stake, and their presence on the front lines now is a testament to the scars left by that tragedy. Let us pause to consider a concrete example. When the Russian Constitution was amended in 2020, it similarly reset President Vladimir Putin's term limits, sparking outrage among opposition figures and raising global eyebrows. In Togo, President Faure Gnassingbé's extended rule has also been justified through constitutional changes, leading to cycles of protest and repression. Such precedents show how fragile the rule of law becomes when leaders reinterpret limits for personal gain. Legal experts and activists warn that this is no mere loophole. Manipulating the law's intent does more than break the rules. It corrodes the very idea of self-government. If leaders can simply reset limits or rewrite constitutions for their own gain, democracy becomes an empty promise. Old wounds are reopening. Ethnic and regional tensions, never far from the surface, flare as some communities feel pushed aside or targeted. The legacy of exclusion and broken promises has left scars that fuel today's anger. Young people, in particular, believe they have been denied a stake in their country's future. But this is not just a battle over legal technicalities or distant ideals. For Ivorians, the fight is about reclaiming agency, dignity, and the right to shape their own destiny. When those sworn to maintain order waver, who truly holds the fate of a nation in their hands? The so-called economic miracle has not reached every corner. Youth unemployment remains stubbornly high, rural poverty is rampant, and corruption festers beneath the surface. As the gulf between rich and poor yawns wider, resentment deepens. For example, in the northern region of Korhogo, many young men have found themselves without work for months on end, while in Abidjan's wealthier Cocody district, luxury cars glide past new shopping malls. This lopsided development feeds the sense that the system is rigged against ordinary citizens. If the Constitution can be discarded so easily, the danger extends far beyond Ivory Coast. It sets a precedent for all of West Africa, one that threatens to undo decades of hard-won democratic progress. If limits can be swept aside for one, why would any leader ever step down again? The people's belief in law, justice, and their own voices withers. We need only look to Guinea, where President Alpha Conde's controversial third term was followed by violent unrest and a coup. The pattern is all too familiar, and each iteration weakens the democratic spirit in the region. The non-commissioned officers, those who have carried the burdens of past crises, cannot forget the mutinies that fractured the ranks in recent years. The ghosts of those chaotic days linger, warning them against becoming instruments of another political crackdown. They know that picking the wrong side could mean not just shame, but shared responsibility if the nation descends into chaos. In 2017, soldiers mutinied over unpaid bonuses, nearly bringing the government to its knees. That memory remains vivid in barracks across the nation. As the uprising swells, every eye turns to the Ivorian military, the institution that has, for generations, tipped the scales between popular revolt and suppression. But this time, the army itself is riven with uncertainty. Ordinary soldiers, many hailing from the same towns as the demonstrators, now feel the weight of soaring costs and unfulfilled promises. For them, obeying orders to turn weapons on their own communities is no longer a simple command. Each choice carries the specter of betrayal. Higher still, the generals and senior commanders face a dilemma that transcends loyalty to President Ouattara. They fear not only the wrath of international bodies like the United Nations or the African Union, but also the nightmare of a military torn apart from within. In hushed meetings, they whisper about the lasting stain that would mark anyone remembered as the general who crushed a people's movement, or the last guardian of a collapsing regime. For now, their answer is caution. Troops are stationed at vital crossroads in Abidjan and Bouaké, but avoid clashing openly with crowds. The army sends out a muted message, neither a shield for the president nor a sword for the street. This ambiguous posture leaves the country teetering, the balance of power suspended by a thread, and the risk of sudden collapse ever present. Beyond Ivory Coast's frontiers, the world watches but says little. ECOWAS, the West African bloc, has yet to take a decisive stance. France, ever wary of accusations of neo-colonial meddling, tiptoes carefully, hoping to protect banks and businesses without inflaming old resentments. Their collective silence is its own message. Even the powerful are unsure which way the winds of change will blow. But the stalemate cannot last. With every passing day, pressure mounts for someone, soldier, citizen, or outsider, to make the first irreversible move. The stakes could hardly be higher. Should the military split, or should foreign actors value quiet over justice, Ivory Coast may plunge into violence. Or worse, send a chilling signal that democracy is merely optional. What follows here will echo across borders, reshaping the lives of millions and the prospects for freedom throughout Africa. Meanwhile, global investors and financiers press quietly for calm. Their priority is stability, fearing that unrest could send shockwaves through cocoa markets, disrupt mining contracts, and threaten precious profits across the region. This focus on order, not justice, only deepens local suspicion, fueling anger that Ivorian voices are being sacrificed for distant interests yet again. In 2011, after post-election violence, the price of cocoa soared, unsettling markets from London to Shanghai. The world's economic entanglement with Ivory Coast's fate is undeniable. Still, there is a pulse of hope. Across Africa, young Pan-African activists are galvanized. Digital networks link youth from Lagos to Dakar, who amplify Ivorian stories of courage and call for true democracy. For a new generation, this struggle is not only about Ivory Coast, but about whether the continent's future will be shaped by the people or by the powerful few. In WhatsApp groups and Twitter threads, activists share tactics and stories, recalling the energy of the Arab Spring when digital tools bridged distances and united causes. Ordinary people reshape history when the odds are stacked so high against them? Ivory Coast streets have become a crucible where decades-old wounds and rivalries are set aside for something bigger. Students, farmers, workers, and opposition leaders are forging a rare unity, proof that even the deepest divides can heal when a nation's soul is at stake. Economic reform cannot just pave new highways for the wealthy or earn applause from foreign investors. True progress means rural villagers, restless youth, and struggling families all feel hope on their tables and dignity in their work. When prosperity is real and shared, democracy grows roots that cannot be easily torn up. In Rwanda, post-genocide economic recovery was coupled with ambitious infrastructure and health reforms, though not without its own setbacks and criticisms. The Ivorian challenge is to match economic modernization with social justice and inclusion. But courage, no matter how fierce, is only the beginning. Lasting change demands more than marching crowds or defiant slogans. The rule of law must be rebuilt from the ground up. Transparent limits on presidential power, impartial elections, and real inclusion for every voice, not just the loudest. Without this, even the greatest victory risks dissolving into yet another chapter of broken promises. Consider the lessons of Tunisia, where a successful revolution faltered when inclusive institutions proved elusive, and where the hard work of building a new political order outlasted the euphoria of victory. There is strength in pressure from below. Young people and civil society, empowered by digital tools, can force both local leaders and distant capitals to listen. When millions unite, the tremors reach even the most insulated boardrooms and distant governments. No one can claim ignorance when the streets are alive with the demand for justice. In 2019, Sudanese protesters toppled a 30-year dictatorship, showing that sustained, united action can move even the most entrenched rulers. What can be done now? Here are practical steps for citizens and leaders. The world cannot afford to look away. Citizens everywhere must demand that their own governments and corporations are held accountable for actions that shape Ivorian lives. Silence and indifference only embolden those who profit from instability, while solidarity and scrutiny can open the door to real reform. Practical steps include petitioning lawmakers, organizing consumer boycotts of companies complicit in abuses, and amplifying local voices through international media. But the path ahead remains treacherous. Can the nation's fragile unity survive the tests still to come? History shows that the aftermath of mass mobilization is fraught with danger. In Egypt, the unity of Tahrir Square splintered amid competing interests, while in South Korea, the candlelight protests of 2016 led to the peaceful impeachment of a president. The outcome depends as much on what follows the protests as on the protests themselves. The fate of democracy in Africa may hinge on moments like this. What happens in Ivory Coast now is not just about one leader or one vote. It is about the right of every African to help shape their future peacefully and fairly. If these lessons are ignored, not just Ivory Coast, but the hopes of an entire continent could be swallowed by the shadows of authoritarian rule. But if this moment is seized, it could light a fire that inspires a generation and show the world that people's voices can still bend the arc of power. First, maintain nonviolent discipline. Throughout history, movements that have resisted the urge to retaliate violently have been more likely to achieve lasting reform. In Serbia, the non-violent Otpor movement played a key role in ousting Slobodan Milosevic. Training marshals, establishing clear codes of conduct, and creating rapid response teams to de-escalate tensions can protect the movement's legitimacy. Second, build coalitions across old divides. Unity must extend beyond the protest into negotiations and institution building. This means inviting marginalized groups, such as ethnic minorities, women's organizations, and youth activists, into the decision-making process. The South African transition from apartheid included a broad array of stakeholders, making the resulting democracy more resilient. History is shaped by those who refuse to remain silent. As Ivory Coast stands at a crossroads, What part will you play in this unfolding story? Third, insist on transparency and international monitoring. Demanding that independent observers oversee any electoral process or dialogue can deter manipulation and violence. In Ghana, the presence of credible observers has helped maintain electoral integrity, even in tense contests. Fifth, invest in civic education and grassroots organizing. Change endures when people understand their rights and responsibilities. Workshops, public forums, and radio campaigns can help ensure that democracy is not just a slogan, but a living practice. Fourth, harness international solidarity. Diaspora communities and sympathetic allies abroad can lobby for sanctions against abusers and for humanitarian aid. During Liberia's civil wars, diaspora advocacy played a vital role in pushing for international intervention and post-war reconciliation. This is not simply a turning point for one nation. It is a reckoning for all of West Africa. The courage surging through the streets reminds us that democracy is not a gift granted by laws or leaders. It is built and defended by ordinary people, by those who demand dignity and justice, even when the price is high. The world watches Ivory Coast, but the world's gaze cannot decide its fate. What truly matters is what Ivorians and their neighbors across the region choose to do next. Will you witness history's old patterns repeat, or will you join the chorus for real change? What happens from here depends on people like you, students, workers, parents, neighbors. The future, whether it delivers true democracy or deeper autocracy, will be forged by today's choices. In markets, in classrooms, online, and in quiet conversations at home, every act of courage will echo through decades to come. Each generation reaches a moment when silence is no longer neutral. It becomes complicity. For millions in Ivory Coast, that moment has come. Their struggle is not simply about a single election or one president. It is a battle for the right to shape their collective destiny and for democracy, equality, and hope to finally take root for every citizen, not just the powerful. If democracy is to survive and thrive in Ivory Coast, it will be because people like you refused to accept less. The stakes could not be higher. The spirit of a nation is on the line, and so too is the future of a continent. So as this chapter of Ivory Coast's story is written, ask yourself, on which side of history will you stand? Will you speak up, share, and reach out, or step aside as others define your fate? This question belongs not only to Ivorians, but to anyone who dreams of justice and freedom. Let us close by recalling the lesson of history. When millions move together, not all change is immediate, and setbacks are inevitable. Yet, time and again, from the salt marches of India to the velvet revolutions of Eastern Europe, from the fight for civil rights in the United States to the recent pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, determined, united people have rewritten the fate of their nations. Some efforts led to triumph, others to painful retrenchment, but all left a mark on the world's conscience. The story of Ivory Coast is still unfolding. Its outcome will be shaped not only by the actions of leaders and generals, but by the choices of ordinary people, by the courage to dream, to demand, and to build a future that honors the promise of democracy. As the world watches, the next chapter is waiting to be written. The pen is in the hands of those who refuse to be silent, who believe that together they can bend even the most stubborn arc of history toward justice.